Welcome to the Big World Made Small podcast for the adventure traveler. I'm thrilled you're here. My name is Jason Elkins, and in addition to being your host, I'm also a former U.S. Army paratrooper, third-generation commercial hot air balloon pilot, paramotor pilot, ex-Montana fly fishing guide, advanced open water scuba diver, and a full-time nomad that's visited more than 30 countries on 6 continents. As a seasoned adventure travel expert with a passion for creating and sharing meaningful experiences, I'm on a quest to impact the lives of adventure travelers, the tour operators they rely on, and the communities that host them. Every week, I bring you exclusive interviews with fascinating adventure tourism experts who have agreed to share their personal stories, favorite destinations, and some invaluable travel insights they've picked up along the way. We'll enjoy a casual conversation, create some connections, and likely share some laughs. It's my hope that by the end of each episode, this big world will feel just a bit smaller. Let's get started, shall we? Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of the Big World Made Small podcast for the adventure traveler. Today, very, very happy to have Todd Smith here with us. Todd is the founder and president of AdventureSmith Explorations. And if you were to go to his website, you'd see that that's kind of where the Smith came from, and AdventureSmith, but it's a great play on words. I love it. So, Todd, welcome to the show. So happy to have you on the Big World Made Small podcast.
Jason, yeah, pleasure to be here. Thanks for the invitation.
Yeah, no, it's my pleasure. And we had spoken, boy, it was probably a month or two ago, kind of a little bit about what you've been doing and what you've been up to and kind of other people. We were just speaking a little bit about other people in the industry as well. You'd mentioned that you're headed off to the ATTA World Summit. It's going to be in Panama this year. So we've got a lot of mutual friends and a lot of mutual connections and probably some very shared interests. So it's fun to have you on.
Absolutely. Yeah. A pleasure to be here. You've got some great guests and hope I can live up to the expectations.
Well, as I was telling you before I pushed, we don't know where this conversation is going to go. For our listeners, there is never a script or never a plan. So who knows? But Todd, I do want to start. There's always one place I like to start because I think our listeners are interested. It's kind of like that, you know, when you're out with guests somewhere, maybe you're leading an expedition or trip somewhere, and after dinner, the questions start there. Todd, how did you get into this? Todd, what were you doing before this? All that type of stuff. And I always figure if that's what people are asking, then why reinvent the wheel? Let's have that conversation because that seems to be what people are interested in. And it's a conversation I know you and I have both had many, many times. So for our audience, let's start with Todd. How did you get from where you were to where you are now? How far back should we go?
Yeah, great question. It goes back to after college, I actually started working in the ski industry in Lake Tahoe in California, and had a great time doing that for a number of years. But what happened was my girlfriend at the time, who's my wife now, replied to an ad in the paper to go to Alaska and work at a lodge for the summer, right? They were in Tahoe targeting seasonal employees. We were getting laid off for the winter, needed something to do for the summer. So we answered an ad and went to work at Glacier Bay Lodge in Alaska. And I actually started out as a bus driver and had a great summer and got exposed to Alaska and the wilderness and Glacier Bay National Park. But I figured out pretty quick that I really wanted to get out there into the backcountry where all the action was, where the animals were. And so the company that owned the lodge actually owned a couple of small overnight boats. And so I actually convinced somebody I knew what I was talking about and became a naturalist guide and got on one of these boats the next summer and started my career in cruising.
Okay, very cool.
Yeah, that led to the boats that we worked with at that time were a little bit more rustic, if you will, and a little bit more rough around the edges. And there were some definitely nicer competitors out there. So we were looking to distinguish ourselves. So I made a pitch to the management that we should stop going from town to town and we should put kayaks on board and hire a bunch of guides and do wilderness cruises in Alaska. And they thought that was a great idea. So we implemented that and it just became wildly successful. As far as I know, it was one of the the first, small ship cruises in the world, or certainly in Alaska, to put kayaks and Zodiacs on board and really do backcountry exploration. And so that's really what launched my career. I grew from there, and just about 20 years ago founded AdventureSmith with that idea to take that style of travel, to work with operators all around the world, and embrace this kind of fledgling industry of expedition cruising. So that's how it started, kind of on a whim, and it's been a fun ride.
I love hearing that, because anybody that had listened to kind of the pilot episode of this show, we mentioned kind of if the idea of a resort hotel, beach vacation, or cruise or whatever is your idea of adventure, you're in the wrong place or whatever. And I'm not knocking any of that stuff, but really what you're talking about is so much different. And I realized after I recorded that, I was like, there's different types of cruises. And when you lump that word in, I've always, for most of my life, I'm not a cruise person. I would never do a cruise. And then I did an expedition boat trip thing in Chile for a few years, and they had the helicopter and Zodiacs and kayaks. And it was like, wow, that's like not what I was thinking when I was growing up thinking about cruises. So
absolutely. When I first got into the industry, and when we first founded AdventureSmith, that was the battle, right? I tell people that I have a cruise company, and they're like, oh my God, I am not doing that. I am never getting on a cruise ship. And you had to say, no. And you had to explain to people that, hey, there's this whole other niche, we're kind of a niche within a niche. These trips are all about getting off the boat, hiking, kayaking, snorkeling, that sort of thing. Then you come back to the ship and have a glass of wine and a hot shower, and while you're sleeping, they relocate to do it again the next day. And people didn't really understand that, and now here we are 20 years later, and the industry really has kind of blossomed, right? And the expedition ships are going farther than they ever have before. They're going into more destinations. There's more companies doing it. And so now the challenge, instead of just, telling people that this industry exists, is there's so much information out there, and so much kind of conflicting information. What is small? What is active? That people really get confused and overwhelmed. And us having done this for 20 years, that's really our role now. We're not advocating for the industry anymore. We're really helping people decipher between all the choices that are out there and getting them on the right trip or the right ship for their interests and their ability and their budget and their schedule. So it has changed over the years, but you still find people that say, I'm not cruising. And then once they do it, they love it, once they do the small ships.
What came up for me listening to you is, I guess when I asked the question about people, they bring up cruise. Oh, cruise. Maybe you're at I don't know where. You're just out and about, and you tell somebody you're in the cruise industry, like you just said, I would never do a cruise. I'm more curious about the person that you say, I work in the cruise industry, and they're like, oh my gosh, I love cruises. I was in the Caribbean last year, and we're going to go do a Mediterranean cruise. Tell me all about your stuff. How do you approach that conversation in a tactful manner? I'm just curious. I know you've had that conversation. So what does that sound like? How do you say, well, no, I don't do that, without kind of like deflating them or bursting their bubble?
Yeah, I mean, another good question. Let me tell you a story. I'll go back and tell you a story. So when I was guiding up in Glacier Bay National Park off of these small ships, we would launch the kayaks in front of, just spectacular tidewater glacier situations. So we'd be out there, myself with six double kayaks, and we'd be paddling around and enjoying the wilderness and maybe watching the glacier calve. And then every now and then a big cruise ship would descend upon us, right?
Mm-hmm.
And we would have to kind of scurry off to the side and make sure we weren't in the way of the captain or the pilot of the ship. And of course, everybody, 2,000 people, 5,000 people on the railing of a cruise ship, they're looking at the glacier, and they spot us down here,
mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
And I always wish I had a sign, right? Go to the website and check this out, because I used to tell my guests, half the people on that ship think we're absolutely nuts, right? And the other half, they want to be out here, right? They want to be doing this, and they wish they were down here with us. So that's kind of how I approach it when I run into somebody who's got experience with mainstream cruising. Is it doesn't take too many questions to find out what they love about it. Is it the casino and the Broadway shows and the midnight buffets, or is it the destinations, and the culture and the nature of the places that they're going to? And if they say it's the off vessel type things, then I know I've got them hooked. And I say, well, there's a better way to do it, that you can get off the boat and explore those destinations more deeply on an expedition cruise. And so, like I said, it doesn't take too long. And I don't dismiss anybody who's interested in big ship cruising. There's room for those folks as well. But I think a lot of people who've done it, if they knew that the small ships existed, they would jump ship, so to speak, pun intended.
It would be interesting if you could look at the stats. Maybe you have a pretty good feel for this stuff. But yeah, I imagine a big cruise ship with several thousand. I don't know, how many people do they put on the big cruise ships? They're
getting bigger and bigger. Right? When I was guiding, they were about 2,000 people. Now they're up to about 5,000 guests and maybe 2,000 or 3,000 crew on the biggest ships.
Wow,
really a floating city.
Yeah, because I'm imagining you're on a ship like that because you don't know any better. You're like, I want to go to Alaska. You see the pictures of whales breaching, or I guess the glaciers, it's calving, right? And you're like, wow, I want to go there. And then you find yourself on a boat with 4,000 other people. And then you see that small ship that's closer, or you see them getting off their small ship to go up in a Zodiac to get close to this stuff. And yeah, it's like, you wonder what the stats are, like how many people that end up going on a small ship cruise started on a bigger cruise and saw it. And it's just,
I don't know. I don't have the stats. That's a difficult thing to track, but I do know it happens. Every couple of weeks we will get somebody who calls and says, hey, I went to Alaska on a big ship cruise and I'm calling you because I want to go back and I want to see Alaska. So they learned about it somewhere in between, and they recognize that those small ships can kind of really get to what Alaska is about, right? I mean, the towns are great. Don't get me wrong. But the big ships go from town to town and you kind of sleep in between. Well, I think what in between is what people go to Alaska for, right? It's the bears, it's the whales, it's the eagles, and it's the glaciers, and it's the solitude and the wilderness and the impact. That's why it's so unique, and that's what people are really expecting. And it's just harder to recreate with a mass tourism. With the small ships, it's really inherent in what they do. It happens. Like I said, every couple of weeks somebody will express that on the phone to us, and it's a pleasure to be able to turn them on to this style of travel.
I bet not too many people go back the other direction voluntarily. Maybe a family member insists that they go on a Royal Caribbean cruise after they've been on a small ship cruise with you or something. But I'm guessing it's not like
I'd like to say nobody ever goes back. I don't know.
Yeah, it's kind of hard to imagine. This is great. We're going to discuss this a bit more, but I also, before we get too far into the conversation, I want to really go back to the beginning. I want to go back a little further if you're okay with it, because you mentioned you kind of started at when I finished school, I got involved in the ski industry. And I'm curious, I'm guessing there was something that was going on before that, maybe during school, maybe during your childhood, that, I mean, not everybody finishes school and goes and gets involved in the ski industry and ends up running an expedition cruise tour operation, all that stuff. So what happened before you graduated college?
Yeah, during college, I actually was diagnosed with cancer, and I had to leave school, go through treatment. I went through a couple of surgeries and chemotherapy and what have you. And that, for a young person is a little bit scary, but I look back on it now as a life-changing event. Right. So I learned pretty early on, to live life to its fullest, to make decisions based on what you want, not on what the outside pressures might be. So after college, instead of going straight into the job market, I ended up moving to Lake Tahoe. And it was supposed to be, just for a season or two, right? I was going to be a ski bum and live that lifestyle and have fun and, then go back to the real world. But of course, these things have a way of propagating themselves. And once you get into that lifestyle, it's hard to go back, like I said. So we were skiing, and we got this opportunity in Alaska. And then I was working in tourism in Alaska and in Baja during the winters and the summers, and doing my shoulder seasons in Tahoe, until it eventually became, kind of a full-time thing with tourism and with guiding. And we were doing that for a number of years. After I left the small ship industry, I actually went to work for an ecotourism operator, a great mentor who was one of the founders of the International Ecotourism Society. And so I actually learned that whole side of the industry as well, how to hire local guides, how to keep the money from guests' purchases in the local community, how to raise money for conservation and local communities through tourism, things like that. So that was a great education and experience as well. I was having a great time living this lifestyle, traveling all over the world. But at the same time, my wife and I wanted to come back to Tahoe, and we had this connection here. And so we decided, well, how are we going to do that? So, the inspiration was really to take this concept of small ship expedition cruising, which I had so much experience with, and then this other niche of kind of conservation and ecotourism and sustainable travel, and marry them together. In 2003, we moved back to Lake Tahoe, and because we're kind of a phone-based, internet-based company, we can be based anywhere. So we based ourselves here and launched AdventureSmith. And so it's super fun, because when you live in a resort town like this, I mean, I'm just super blessed. I tell people, I get to go all over the world, right? I'm going to Panama in a couple of weeks. I was just in Europe, so I get to go all these amazing trips all over the world. And usually, when you come back from a trip like that, you come home and you're like, oh, I got to go back to the grind, right? And I'm back to the day to day. And you kind of go through this little depression when you come back from an outstanding trip like that. But when you live in Lake Tahoe, you don't get that, right? You come home and you're like, oh my gosh, I love where I live. I get to go skiing, or I'm going paddling on the lake, or I'm going for a hike. And so it really is the best of both worlds. And I consider myself very fortunate.
I'm reluctant to say this, but sometimes I don't have a filter, so I'm going to say it. It's not like you're going back home to Des Moines, Iowa, right? It's so I get it. It's I've done enough traveling and lived in some cool places, and when you get home, you're like, oh man, that's cool. There's stuff to do here as well. That's a real treat.
I lived in Seattle. I lived in San Diego. I lived in some big cities and places like that. And, when you come home to a big city from a wilderness trip, it's a whole different thing. When you come home to Tahoe, it's a soft landing.
Easier transition. Yeah, I'm sure. Hey, I got to say, I'm really happy I asked the question about what happened before you graduated school. And I appreciate you sharing that, because as you were saying that, I was like, oh, okay, I get it. That makes a lot of sense. I've got a follow-up question. If that had not have happened, I know it's impossible. We can't see 2020, hindsight or whatever. But if that had not happened and you'd had a more just normal kind of college experience, do you think, were there other influences? Do you think you would have ended up doing something similar, or what do you think you would have been doing? I'm sure you've thought about it.
I don't know. It's a really good question. Perhaps. I mean, I credit my grandfather with kind of my love of travel, and even in college, I was starting to get into travel. I was taking road trips down into Baja. I was camping all over the West, going to national parks, things like that. So, it could have gone that direction. I was studying sciences, biology and ecology. That certainly played into a factor down the road when I became a guide. That was a nice background to have. So it's hard to say, where that environmental science career might have taken me. But I look back at my cancer as a life-changing event, because one of the reasons I ended up in Tahoe was because, thankfully at the time I was 21 years old and I was still on my parents' health plan,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so growing up in Northern California, I could be in Tahoe and I could still go to see my doctor. I had to get regular checkups, right? After the situation had resolved itself, I still had to get regular checkups pretty frequently. And so Tahoe was a conducive place to do that. And so if I hadn't had the cancer, if I had moved to Tahoe, I may have never answered the ad to go to Alaska, and it could have gone a whole different direction. But I'd like to say that my grandfather's influence and my love of travel was there, so maybe it would have manifested itself anyway.
During this conversation, I've heard you mention your grandfather. I've heard you mention your wife, who clearly, she was the one that applied for or found the ad initially. I'm guessing she was pretty supportive in the beginning. What about other people in your life? Was there any? Because sometimes we get that, like, I'm going to go to college, and parents sometimes shell out a bunch of money for us to go to college, and then we go run a ski lift operator. We work for the ski patrol. Sometimes there's resistance. I'm just curious, anything you'd like to share there about other people in your life, and were they supportive about your decisions?
Oh man, yeah. Well, there's a long list, but yeah, it would start with my wife. Yeah, she famously, would say, we would go on walks, right, or hikes, or wherever we were. Like I said, we were traveling around the West, camping, going down to Baja, doing paddle trips, that sort of thing. And I'm constantly inundating her with information about the plants and the animals, and just it was my interest, right? That's what I was into. And she would be like, you should be a guide. You should be a tour guide. You should get into this. And I think she was just trying to shake me off a little bit so that I would talk to other people about it instead of just constantly.
You should go find somebody else to
rattling it off to her. Yeah. So she kind of planted that seed and gave me the confidence to do it. Like I said, my grandfather was a big influence on me, and they traveled a lot. And I remember, like, as a young child, they would come home from a trip and give us slideshows, and just seeing pictures of exotic places, really kind of instilled something in me. When I was working for the cruise line in Alaska, I had a number of great mentors, but one of the marketing staff, really, like I said, I was a guide and eventually became kind of the program manager. So I was in charge of the itineraries. I was hiring, training the guides, working with the captains to talk about, plan out where we would go, working on the permits, very operational type background. But when we made the switch to these more expedition type cruises, the marketing folks really didn't know what to do with it. Right. We made this decision, and so they brought me in and they were like, Todd, we need your help. We're traditional cruise folks, and we don't really know how to sell this. So how can we lay out the brochure? Why don't you come with us to talk to travel agents and tell them what it's like? Who is the client for this? And so one of the vice president of marketing really took me under his wing, and he was a big mentor during that time. Like I said, my boss at the ecotourism company was also a wonderful mentor, and was really, really a founder in the sustainable travel industry. And so I learned a lot from him, and made a lot of connections. And so they were all instrumental in kind of this all coming together the way it did. And I still, I go to these events, like we talked about the Adventure Travel World Summit in Panama, and I'm just inspired by these people that are doing so much. When I first started doing this, I was a lot younger than I am now, and I used to joke with a friend of mine. We were young and we were going to these events 20 years ago, and we used to whisper to each other and said, hey, there's so and so, and there's so and so, and these are the elder statesmen of adventure travel. And I said, someday that's going to be us, right? And so I went to the last event. I went to the last event in Ecuador just a few months ago, and I called him as soon as I got home, my buddy Joe, and I said, Joe, it's happened. We're those people now. I got the gray beard, and we're getting to be the elder statesmen now. But it's just inspiring the people that work in this industry, and the way they share their passion and their knowledge. So I continue to be inspired and mentored by a lot of folks out there. As there's a lot of interesting people in this industry.
Yeah, absolutely. And on that note, because you've got some experience, you went from kind of you didn't use the word newbie, but the newbie to the elder statesman. You've seen some changes. You've got some gray in your beard. You've got a lot of gray in your beard. I'll be honest. I've got quite a bit in my beard as well. And I think both you and I have seen a lot of change, but you've probably been closer to it than I have over that course of a longer period of time. So I'm curious, can you put your finger on any changes in the types of people that are participating in this business now? Or do you feel like it's pretty much the same personality style that was getting into this 20, 30 years ago that's still working in it now, or that's coming in now? Or do you think it's shifted? Because if you look at society as a whole, we can say, well, every generation has their own, kind of way of looking at the world and way of approaching the world. So what are the biggest changes you've seen as far as the people working in the business?
Yeah, good question. I mean, I think there's two ways to look at this. And in one way, it is the same personality type. These are adventurous people who are passionate about places, passionate about communities, passionate about the planet, and want to use their entrepreneurship and use travel as a means to help communities, and make connections, right? You're making connections with visitors to the places that we travel. And so I see a lot of young people coming up, and they all have that, right? And a lot of them even have more, right? They have a lot more technical savvy now on how to do it and how to get the word out and how to use social media and things like that to spread the word. So there's a lot of grassroots people coming up, starting businesses, former guides like myself, people like that are coming up and founding or joining, just wonderful companies, and they're doing wonderful things all over the world. On the other hand, in my industry, in the expedition cruise industry, there's something that's happening on the other side, right? We see a lot of big ship companies, a lot of people that come from the traditional cruising side of things, and they're moving into this niche a little bit blind, I might add, because they see it as a business opportunity. They see it as lucrative. These are, high-end, more kind of luxurious, more expensive type trips, and they see this as a business opportunity. So they're getting in it from that side, and they honestly, really don't know the nuances. It's a lot, more difficult to get the right person on an Antarctica cruise than it is to get the right person on a cruise out of Miami. And so, they're making mistakes. They're getting the wrong people on the wrong cruises. The cruises may get a bad review then because it's just the wrong type of people, because they're seeing it as a money-making opportunity and not from this side of the passion and the industry and the deep knowledge that it takes, and that a lot of us who've grown up with it have. So that's an unfortunate side effect of growth, but it's something that's out there.
It's a super interesting topic. We could probably do a whole other episode about that and maybe some other, I don't know. But so what I hear you saying, it's, these bigger cruise companies, they're used to the big ships with 2,000, 3,000, 4,000 people. They're saying, oh, look at these guys making money with these small boats. We should buy a few small boats, take our same staff that we have on the big boats and pick a few of them and go put them on the small boat, and maybe use the same marketing team, and it just doesn't fit, or is...
A little bit. Yeah. I mean, so that is happening. That's actually, there's some interesting cases where that happened, and then they tried it for a few years and then decided it wasn't worth it. And now they're selling those boats off. So I would say maybe it's not the cruise lines as much, but it is like cruise agencies, right? Big agencies that have been selling traditional cruises for a long time, see expedition cruises as a market opportunity and are jumping in. And so if you've sold, traditional cruises to Europe or Caribbean, for your whole life, all of a sudden, selling a trip to Antarctica sounds very appealing, but it takes a little bit more in-depth knowledge to make that switch. And so that's what we're seeing is a lot of big time kind of agencies with a lot of money behind them, kind of seeing this as an opportunity to make money, which it probably is. Yeah.
And I hope this doesn't sound like I'm knocking anybody, but that agent who has been working for a large cruise line company selling large cruises for 20 years, all of a sudden, I mean, there was a probably reason they were attracted into that business in the first place. They were probably excited about cruises, large cruises. They maybe have that, maybe that's their thing. They enjoyed that. And they're probably, when they told their friends, I work in the cruise industry, they're having that conversation about, oh, I can help you book a trip to the Mediterranean. I can help you book a trip to the Caribbean or whatever. And then you take that slightly different personality and say, okay, now look, we did something on Virtuoso, and now you can sell these other cruises to Antarctica. And they're like, okay, that's cool. But, I can see where that might present some challenges if you multiply that over however many thousands of agents are selling cruises out there. So yeah,
I think so. Like I said, I don't want to bash on anybody either.
Yeah, I get it. It's just, if I'm used to selling cars, if I've been selling cars for 20 years and then all of a sudden the car dealership says, hey, we're going to start selling houses next door. We just bought this land and congratulations, you're now a real estate agent. That could be a challenge. So I'm not knocking anybody. It's just, I don't know.
Yeah, well, I mean, you get back to what we talked about originally the difference in the industry. Small ships versus the big ships. It really is a niche within a niche, and it just takes a level of knowledge that takes a lot of time. Right? I've been doing it for 20 years. I've been to Antarctica, I don't know, 10 times, and I still don't know it all. Right? I'm still learning the nuances of it. So yeah, it's I would just encourage anybody who's getting into it. You really need to do a deep dive. It's not something that you want to just dabble in, because if somebody's spending $20,000 on a trip to Antarctica and they're on the wrong product for them, it's bad for everybody, right? It's bad for the agency, it's bad for the cruise line, it's bad for the client.
Yeah, well, yeah, they go expecting one thing, and they expect the midnight buffet or whatever, and it's not there. Then yeah, that could be that's not a great example. You could give many better examples, but I do want to ask you this, because we talked a little bit about kind of personality types and niches and just people in general. And I recognize that if you're hiring a guide for an expedition cruise or any adventure tour business really, or if you're hiring a salesperson or if you're hiring an operations person, there's a lot of differences. You might look for different things, but I suspect there's some people that are listening to the show, that frequently listen to the show, that are, aspirational about maybe getting out of what they're doing and getting into this industry. So I'd love to hear your thoughts real quick on, because you mentioned passion, people that are passionate about these places, passionate about, maybe the environment or whatever it is, but I'm curious what the skill set is. So you're hiring a guide to work on a small ship in Alaska for the summer. What's the skill set you're most looking for in that guide?
Yeah, interesting question. The guide industry does tend to be pretty tight knit, So how do you break in, right? On small ships, I think the way you break in is you don't start as a guide, right? Okay. You start working on these boats as a deckhand, as part of the hotel staff, as an assistant, somewhere like that. Do a summer or two there and see if you can kind of work your way into it. There are a number of certifications out there right now. We talked about the Adventure Travel Trade Association. They're working on guide certifications, things like that. Yeah.
Well, let me ask you this, Todd. Let me ask you this. So someone comes to you, friend of a friend or a family member, a niece, nephew, whatever, and says, I want to get into the guiding business. I want to be a small ship expedition guide. And you say, okay, well, you should start out here. You should start, this is a good way to work your way up as deckhand or whatever. But what's the skill set that, like, if you're really doing them justice, you're going to look at them and say, well, you can work your way up for 2 years, but if you're missing this particular skill set, you're kind of wasting your time, because you're never going to get. You might have the skill set to be a deckhand, but you might not have this important skill set that you're going to need to actually become a guide someday.
Yeah, I think the most important, kind of trait for a good guide is people skills, right?
Yeah.
It really just comes down to being able to communicate with people, being able to express yourself, having the confidence to do that, listening to people and what they're saying, and kind of acting on it. And so, again, I'm not sure it's something that is very easily trained, but it is that those kind of people skills, and communication, and working with people. And like I said, the best guides, I mean, of course, you're out there to show people a good time. You're out there to keep people safe, but I feel like the best guides are the ones, like I said, that can really communicate the meaning of the destination and connect it to the interests of the visitor. And, so you have this opportunity as a guide, you get these people maybe a little bit out of their comfort zone, right? You're in the wilderness, you're in a kayak, or you're walking around in bear country or something like that. Maybe you see bear, or maybe you're paddling in front of a glacier, and these people are having this really wow kind of emotional experience. And you need to be able to kind of play on that and say, okay, here we are in Antarctica, and you've just been blown away by this glacier that we walk next to today. And then they come back to the boat, and everybody's sharing their experiences, and they're having this visceral emotional reaction to it. That's when you have them, and you can say, okay, how was that? What did you enjoy about it? And then eventually the conversation might turn around to climate change, or conservation, or penguins and bird flu, and you can take this experience and connect it maybe to an issue, and make them care about that, make them care about a destination, or a place, or a community. And it's only when people really care about and are passionate about and love a place that they're going to do something to preserve it, right? So you have this moment, and it's fleeting and it's rare, but these places and these experiences open people up to this opportunity where you can make this connection. And then if you can plant a seed of conservation, or maybe a small lifestyle change, and they go home and they say, you know what? I'm going to ride my bike today because I learned about climate change when I was in Antarctica, or I'm going to consider buying an EV, or I'm just going to change my lifestyle in ever so subtle ways. If you can scale that up, you can make a difference in the world. And that's what good guiding really is. And to bring it back to your question, you need those kind of people skills, and be able to connect with people and with travelers and with your clients in order to do that.
It's kind of what I hear you saying is emotional intelligence. I think we have this, maybe not like, okay, I show up the first day and I know every single type of penguin, and I know their habits and their mating patterns, and they're this and they're that, and I know the amount of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, and I know all about this stuff. I can be incredibly intelligent about the things we're going to discuss, but I don't have those people skills, and I have the ability to ascertain, is this the right time to have this conversation? I love that you said it the way you did, because I kind of feel like if you show up on an expedition or any type of trip, and immediately it's like, okay, we don't use plastic bottles here, we this, that, and it's so conservation focused from the moment you get there, that it's all about I spoke with one person that they have a whole program around measuring the amount of food that they start the day with, and then they measure the amount of food at the end of the day, and they measure in everything. And it's like, this is the whole trip. I'm thinking, wow, that sounds really boring. Not so great. I'll be honest. And I was like, I'm not there. I don't know. It's not my business. Maybe it works great. But I think what you said was better about give them a reason, that visceral experience. They're there in the environment. They see it. They're excited about it. And then maybe it's a good time to have a conversation about, well, what are the critical things that we need to consider in order so that 20 years from now, you can come back with your grandkids. or whatever?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, emotional intelligence, communication skills, people skills is really kind of it. I mean, there is a whole industry, but academics behind this. It's thematic interpretation is what it is, and you can teach people this skill to make these connections. But I find the people that do it the best are the ones that have that skill kind of already inherent in them. If you just give them the academic, kind of process of how to present things in such a way to make connections, that's great. But if you don't have the nuance and if you don't have kind of the communication skills to do it, it's not gonna resonate. Right. So it takes a little bit of both. But if you have those skills and you learn the process of thematic interpretation, as in addition to all the other skills that a guide needs, that's really the ones that rise above and become the best guides, and those are the people that usually make a career of it, because they're passionate about it. They love connecting with people, and honestly, when you do this well, that's how you get the big tips too, right? And so that's like self-reinforcing as a guide. You're like, oh, what I'm doing is working. People like it. They're tipping me. I think I'm going to do this. I'm going to make a career of it. Yeah.
As opposed to at the end of the first summer, like, man, I can't afford to do that again. That sucked. Yeah, I didn't. These people are cheap. I'm curious if you didn't, and I know this is not the case, but if you are running a business and you need to hire guides, and for some reason you're getting close to the season starting and you haven't had enough people apply, and you were going to go out and start recruiting, and you didn't have any guides, you couldn't go other companies, recruit other guides, but you had to go out into an industry, or if you're a recruiter and said, go get me a guide that's never been a guide, where would you go?
Yeah, well, I do need to kind of, put the caveat out there that AdventureSmith is not hiring guides right now. We work with companies. we work with companies that do that. You
just saw your email inbox filling up with people that want to be guides. I'm happy that you mentioned that.
Well, no, we get it a lot. We get it a lot. I get a lot of friends, and I also we get, and so I love to connect people who are interested in the industry with the actual hiring managers that are doing it. But that's a great question. If you were a hiring manager looking for these types of people, where do you do it? And I think that's $1 million question, because they're constantly looking for good people, right? These jobs, are available, right? They're out there, and the companies that are hiring are always looking for good people. So there are a few kind of tricks of the trade. Like I said, they're looking for these seasonal employees, so looking for other places where active young people are getting laid off for the season is a good. There's entire websites now.
Tahoe.
Yeah, there's entire websites now dedicated to kind of adventure travel jobs. I think ATTA is a good resource, and you kind of have to be crafty, right? When I was hiring for guides in Alaska, we were operating during the summer. So where do I go? Where do I look? Well, I used to go to Hawaii, right? Who's working on the whale boats in Hawaii that are getting laid off in the spring? Because the whales are migrating, so let the guides migrate too, So that was a little trick that I had to find good people, and we found some great people that way.
But if you're looking outside of adventure travel, like I can't hire anybody who's ever worked in adventure travel or on a ship or just in even remotely close to that industry. I guess the question is, what other industry do you think seems to attract the same types of people that would be successful as guides? I'm just curious, because I've asked a few other people this question. I'm just curious if I'm trying to see if there's a trend or a pattern or anything like that. So I'm just curious what your thoughts are.
I don't know, Jason. I think you got me stumped there. I'm not quite sure.
I'm not trying to put you on. I can tell you. So I worked in real estate for several years, and it was teachers. Like teachers were a great prospect to become a realtor, because they just had the heart of a teacher. They liked people. They wanted to help people. They wanted to educate people on the home buying process, that type of thing. I suspect teachers, honestly, I think teachers also could potentially be very good guides, and they're seasonal sometimes.
Yeah.
Or servers in restaurants.
unlike when I did this, there's entire schools now on tourism
That's
and
true.
on the travel industry. So you can find young people who are eager to study this. Recreation, outdoors. There's entire academics, degrees and programs about this. So
Yeah,
there's a lot
yeah,
of
you're
young
right.
people that are
You're
studying
right.
to do this. Yeah.
So when I say, oh, you can't touch anybody from the travel industry, that's kind of like, okay, well, what's the point of this question, Jason? Because there's a lot of people out there that have already raised their hand and said, yeah, I want to do that type of work. Okay, well, I appreciate your candor there. Let's discuss a little bit more about. Let's see, we've covered quite a few things. I think something I really want to discuss is frankly, what do you do? What has your experience been in as far as like preparing for natural things that come along and disrupt our business? We had a case of that here a couple of years ago. We've had financial things in the past. And what have you learned? Because you've been through that type of thing a few times. What have you learned that you would like to share with somebody else listening that might benefit from your wisdom?
Yeah, good question. I mean, certainly anybody in travel who's been in it for any length of time, experienced the pandemic and everything that kind of went along with it. And I think, the lesson that I take out of all of this is, I used to think that our greatest asset was this amazing product, right? These expedition ships where you're getting off the boat and exploring nature and wildlife in these amazing locations. And I've learned that, that's a part of it, but that's not the main part of it. And we used to talk about this, but now it really is in the forefront. And I think that, in order to survive an event like that, it's really about the relationships that we have with people. We talked about, like I said, good guiding and the relationships that you create with a client. But as a business owner, we kind of have three stakeholders, right? Of course, our clients, right? Our clients are an important relationship, and we love to foster a personalized relationship with them, sharing our expertise, sharing our knowledge, and getting them on the right trip. And over the course of 20 years, we've got some amazing clients who've been with us on dozens and dozens of trips, and they come back year after year or 2 or 3 times a year. And that speaks volumes. So that's the primary stakeholder that most business owners are thinking of, right? Or of course, your clients. Secondary, well, not secondary, but on equal footing with the clients are your staff, right? We're proud that, we've been in business for 21 years now. And, more than half my staff have been with me for 10 years or more. So treating your staff right, investing in them, giving them the benefits and creating that work-life balance for them is incredibly important. That I think is an investment that maybe is sometimes overlooked. But we going into the pandemic, we had 16 employees. Unfortunately, we did have to lay off 4 people, kind of immediately. And then we worked with everybody to go through some furloughs and some part-time, but we survived and we were able to keep everybody. And we were actually incredibly busy, right? We had thousands of clients on the books who needed to be rebooked or needed to be reassured or needed to be refunded. So even though trips were not operating, we were incredibly busy, and I needed my staff to be there, showing up. And of course, everybody's dealing with this incredibly stressful time. So you got your clients, you got your staff, and then it's your relationship with your other partners, right? So the people in the field, like I said, the guides, the cruise operators, the lodge operators, all these people that are out there in the field and kind of on the ground, and they also, we all had to come together to kind of survive this, and so we created these working groups on, hey, what are you doing? to maintain your staff? What are you doing, to process refunds or whatever? Or what are you doing, for somebody who's rebooked? And so sharing these challenges and creating a community amongst your colleagues and your partners, became an essential tool to survival for all of us. Even competitors, right? I know other colleagues who own businesses that we compete with, but we came together to share our experiences and kind of commiserate and survive together. I always feel like that we're stronger together than we are apart. If we can advocate for our industry and advocate for our staff and our clients, we're going to be stronger together. So even some competitors that came together during that time. And so, I think the thing that resonates for an event like that, or there's other challenges that we're facing in certain destinations. There's avian influenza that's going around. Some sites in the Galapagos had to be closed for a certain amount of time. There's a challenge of over tourism in some Mediterranean ports. How are we dealing with that? There's the effect of tourism on the communities. So, having strong relationships with your partners gives you a better, pool to draw from, and you can survive these challenges and come up with ideas that you can share with one another than you would be able to do alone.
Right.
So that's what this event has taught me, is that those relationships are really the foundation of AdventureSmith, more so even than the amazing product or the amazing service that we provide. It's those fostering those relationships and maintaining those in the long run is what's helped us survive, and it's what's helping us thrive in the marketplace now. And can you get the marketplace to recognize that? So that's been a big lesson for me.
Appreciate you sharing that. I'm curious. So what came up for me while you were sharing that was kind of like, how do you balance diversification and having a niche? So it's like, okay, my niche is small ship. I'm not speaking for you. I'm just an example. Let me give a totally different example. My niche is mountain trekking, overnight mountain trekking trips, or my niche is Romania bicycle trips. So that's my niche, and I'm really, really good at it. But if something happens in Romania, or that's probably a better example, something happens geographic in my region, my niche, then I'm kind of screwed. But we also tell people the riches are in the niches, and you got to really kind of specialize. You don't want to be offering the big cruise ships, the small expedition cruises. So how do you balance out diversification to protect yourself against regional conflicts, medical concerns, stuff like that, without diluting your niche? I don't know. I haven't thought this question out ahead of time. I don't know what that sounded like, but bear with me. And what do you think?
It's a question that a lot of companies and a lot of people faced, right? Over our tenure in 20 years, we've been able to diversify quite a bit. So we work with destinations around the world, and that was mostly just seasonally, right? If we're only working in Alaska and Antarctica, and something happens, so how can we get destinations that are operating year round, and it balances out just so that the staff is not overwhelmed during certain times of year. But for regional operators, it's an incredible challenge, right? So if you're in a specific location and there's an event in that location, how do you handle it? I've not been in that situation, so I can't speak to it, but I would go back to my previous answer and our discussion about relationships, right? If you've got relationships with a diversity of inbound partners, hopefully they would step up and help. And I can use Ecuador and the Galapagos as an example, that here's this pool of highly trained, highly specialized guides, right, in the Galapagos Island, where 90+% of the economy is based on tourism, and this is something they're rethinking now. But during the pandemic, everything's shut down. These people are instantaneously out of work, not just the guides, right? Now you're talking about the dock operators, the food producers, like I said, 90 or so % of the economy of the islands is based on tourism. So what do you do?
It's and the islands just lost their job. The whole thing,
and so,
right?
Again, I'm not going to say that we were this knight in shining armor that came in and rescued them, but there was this community of operators outside the islands that recognized what was going on and did our best to raise funds and raise awareness and help these people out during this catastrophic event. Right, our industry was and is, based on their efforts, so for 20 years, they were working diligently to keep this industry rolling and to show people a good time and to raise awareness for their islands and raise awareness for the issues. And this is an issue, right? What happens if tourism suddenly shuts down, which is something that, the government and the people hadn't really considered before. So we scrambled and did a little bit of fundraising, which I'd like to think helped, but it certainly, we couldn't reach everybody. But so that's something that now that we're out of it and things are looking a little better is like how can they diversify, and not be as reliant, or how can we change the structure of tourism so that it benefits the people in the community a little bit more, so that there is a nest egg if another event like that should occur. So it's a good question. I think it's a challenge that the tourism faces around the world, and something that should be discussed now in good times. Right, you don't wait until there's a crisis to start to have those conversations. But if you have strong relationships with partners and with operators around the world, there might be some resources there to help you get through.
Yeah. Very cool. I appreciate that response, because that was something I've kind of just been had in my head here recently. It's like, okay, maybe I live in the U.S. and I want to start an outbound tour operation, and I want to kind of specialize in, I'm in Colombia. I just said I'm in the U.S. That was my example. I'm actually in Colombia. But let's say I'm, in the U.S. I was a tour guide for several years, and I want to kind of start my thing. I really like Colombia. I'm going to start a business all about Colombia. But then one bad political event, one election protest, one anything could really have a serious impact on that. So that was kind of my thinking, is like, if I'm listening to this, I'm like, okay, I really want to put all my eggs in the Ecuador basket, the Colombia basket, the Kenya basket, or does it make sense kind of diversify? I just heard you say, diversification is a good thing. And maybe it seems obvious, but as somebody that's spent a lot of time in Latin America, I'm like, I don't know if I'd want to put all my eggs in one basket, because I see things change so quickly. So I was just kind of.
Yeah.
Todd, we've discussed a bunch of things. I've come up with a few different ideas. Thematic presentation. Is that what you said when you teach somebody?
Thematic interpretation. Yeah.
Thematic interpretation. I wrote that down. That sounds like a podcast episode in the works, especially for anybody listening to this that wants to kind of learn more about working in the business, and other tour operators that maybe are like, what was that he just said? I don't have, anyway. So I wrote down some ideas for future podcast episodes. But I'm curious, before we wrap up, what questions did I forget to ask? I should have asked, or you think you just want to make sure that the listeners of the show really, know about either you, your business, life in general, anything like that we should touch on before we wrap up?
Yeah, let's talk a little bit more about my niche, about expedition cruises.
All right. Yeah, good.
What it is, where it goes, what's trending right now.
I'm happy you said that, because I was looking at the time. I'm like, I kind of feel like we talked a lot about other stuff, and I wanted to be respectful of your time, but I've got plenty of time. So let's dig into that some more, because I want people to feel, like they're connected with you, learn some stuff from the podcast, but I also want them to have a clear idea what it is you guys do. So if something resonates, they're like, oh man, I need to reach out to AdventureSmith. I need to go on their website, take a look at that. That's because you got a great website. I was on
Oh,
there right
thanks.
before we started recording. I was like, man, you got a lot of cool trips going, a lot of cool places. And
Thanks.
so
Yeah,
let's
we get
talk about that a
a
little
lot
bit.
of good
What would you
feedback.
like to share? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, so we talked a lot about big ships versus small ships, so what does that exactly mean, right? And I think my definition is very different than what a lot of people's definitions is, right? 1,000 people can be small now, right? We talked about how big cruise ships are getting, so 1,000 people can be small, but to us, that's not small.
Feels very big.
Yeah, and so my industry, again, like starting out as a guide, I know very pointedly what it takes to get people like off of a ship in a wilderness area, and that's kind of our guiding principle, right? Is can you get off the ship away from port? Right. So we don't talk really as much about numbers. How big is a ship or how big is a small ship? We talk a little bit more about access. How can you get people into a Zodiac? How do you get them ashore for a beach walk or a wilderness hike? Or how do you get them into sea kayaks or snorkeling? And so, kind of our criteria, like I said, of what we consider an expedition ship is a ship that has the ability to get people off the boat away from port. Kind of inherently, the number where you can do that and give people a meaningful experience, I feel like is about 150, right? Once you get beyond that, it starts to be difficult to give people a meaningful off-vessel experience. Now, there are boats, and particularly in Antarctica, that are getting bigger than that, up to about 200 or so. And that's just the nature of Antarctica, right? It takes a very specialized kind of a ship in order to do that, and they're very expensive to build. So you need certain numbers to make it pay. But getting off the ship away from port, in the company of a great naturalist guide, that's kind of what it's all about, right? And you asked me before we started talking, who's the client, for a trip like this, and I think, well, you and I think certainly are, right? I think people that maybe are working professionals or maybe just recently retired, people that maybe when they graduated college, they went backpacking around Europe or backpacking around South America or Southeast Asia, right? And they loved it, right? And now they're maybe in their 50s and 60s, and they want that same experience, but they also want a comfortable bed and a hot shower and a nice meal.
And someone to go with them.
And somebody to make the decisions. Yeah. And so that's really what expedition cruises can provide, right? These really kind of, really out of the ordinary experiences, they can be pretty adventurous, right? Paddling in front of a glacier, or taking a Zodiac, near a pod of whales, is something that would be logistically challenging without the platform of these small ships. So you get these incredible experiences that at one time were reserved for only the most rugged, kind of backcountry people. And now ordinary travelers can have these experiences, and it's that access that these small ships can provide these extraordinary opportunities and experiences for ordinary travelers. And getting into the destinations a little bit, I talk up a lot about the big three, and it's really kind of becoming the big four, right? But Alaska, Galapagos, Antarctica, and the Arctic, right? These are four destinations where people get introduced to this style of travel, right? In the Galapagos, the ships are limited to 100 people, with only 16 people ashore. In Antarctica, the ships are limited to 500 people with 100 people ashore. So they're kind of forced into small ships, right?
Mm-hmm.
In Alaska, like I said, there's a lot of choices, but when people know about the small ships, they choose that. But these are the gateway destinations that I call them, that people learn about this style of travel. I'm going to the Galapagos. I've never been on a cruise before. I go on a small boat, and they're like, this is awesome. I'm getting this incredible access. I'm getting away from the towns. I have these wonderful guides and this great food and these really like-minded folks that are on board. And so they love it. And then they come back and say, that was amazing. Where else can I do that? And it's like, well, all over the world, anywhere where anywhere where the land meets the sea, pretty much these days there's a small ship operating. So like I said, those are kind of the gateway destinations where people discover small ship expedition cruises, and once they do it, a lot of them are hooked. And this is exactly what they want to do. They want to do it all over. They want to do it over and over again. So Mediterranean, Caribbean, Australia, New Zealand, Indonesia, South Pacific, of course, Alaska, we talked about, Greenland, Svalbard, Iceland. I mean, so there's just so many wonderful destinations that you could just spend a lifetime, which I have. And I still haven't even come close to doing it all. And there's new destinations and new itineraries all the time. Some of the hot destinations right now, Greenland is really hot. There's a lot of new, unique itineraries in that region. There's some wonderful new boats that are really kind of pushing the limits of sustainable travel, getting away from fossil fuels, but also having the capacity to break through ice and things like that. So the boats that are actually reaching the geographic North Pole. That are just, technological achievements that are just amazing. So the Arctic has been really hot. We're seeing a lot of new itineraries in Mediterranean. The season is extending there, right? It used to be just June, July, and August. Now we're getting into April and May and September and October. And so you can kind of still go when it's not the high season during the summer. Sound like you maybe had a question there.
Yeah, help me understand. So for our listeners, Todd and I are here doing a video call, so he saw the expression on my face. Honestly, I was thinking, okay, take a cruise to the North Pole, other than just the novelty of hitting the geographical North Pole. I mean, honestly, because we're talking about getting off the boat and going and doing stuff. I don't know enough about the Arctic to understand why would somebody do. So I'm just going to say it as maybe a listener might be like, well, why would I want to take a cruise to the Arctic? Because all I imagine is ice, maybe polar bears, maybe some seals. But other than that, help me understand the draw to the Arctic.
Yeah, I mean, that is a big part of it, right? Certainly people that are booking a trip like this are pretty well-traveled people, right? And so some of them might be checking off the box that I said that I went to the North Pole, and that's part of it. But it really is, again, the poles tend to be kind of one of the last, wildernesses on Earth, and people want to see it. The vast expanses of ice, midnight sun, polar bears are a big draw on a trip like that. You're also, on these types of North Pole trips, you're usually visiting or transiting through Svalbard and or Greenland, so you are getting close to the shore as well, and so you're seeing the whales and the seals and the birds, and so just tremendous wildlife. If you're going ashore in Svalbard, there's reindeer and things like that. So wildlife, solitude, wilderness tends to be the big draw. It's interesting. There is this subset within a subset of expedition cruisers, that are the ice travelers, right? And they just do this. They go from pole to pole every year, and they just want to do the next greatest thing, and they want to see the big tabular bergs, and they just love, being in that environment. The Northwest Passage is another, around the northern end of North America, from the Atlantic to Alaska, is another route that has been pioneered recently, and so people that are into it, they just want to be the first ones to do that, and so it really is kind of an interesting niche of these folks that just are really passionate about the poles, passionate about the wildlife and the ice. A lot of people, like I said, Antarctica is definitely the gateway. People want to do it. They want to see the penguins. They want to set foot on Antarctica, and then they learn about it, and then they go to the Arctic, and a lot of people come back and they say, "Wow, I'm more blown away by the expanse and the solitude and kind of the majesty of the Arctic, even more so than Antarctica." Is a common refrain
that's interesting.
that we hear. Yeah.
I'm happy we touched on that, and they saw the expression on my face, because I grew up in the Northern Rockies and cold and ice and snow. Just like I'm not a skier, so I just don't kind of get it. I do get Antarctica. That'll be my number 7 continent. I will go, and I'm excited to go there. But I just had never thought about it. So it
really is kind of.
I'm sure I'm not the only one that was wondering.
Okay. Yeah, up and coming destination. Like I said, in this industry, as it's growing, the operators are like, where can we go that give these people this experience and kind of get away from it all? And that's a place with a lot of untapped potential. And there's this new generation of ships is really well equipped to get there safely and get folks into a pretty amazing environment.
Interesting. I don't know if you mentioned, I don't think you did. I was listening for it, but I don't even know why I want to ask you about this, but is there anything in your mind that's interesting about river cruising in Europe?
Yeah, I mean, there are, that's a whole nother, kind of a niche. And like I said, it's, our criteria is kind of getting off the boat away from port. So it's difficult to do that on a. Yeah,
I don't know enough about the river cruising. I just I've had family members say, I want to go on a river cruise in Europe. And I'm like, I don't think so. But I think it's a
wonderful way to go, right? To see Europe and to get into the middle of these historic cities in a way, that's unique and doesn't, require a lot of logistics, right? Okay. So I think it is unique. We dabble in barge cruises, right, which are very small, 8 to maybe 14, 16 guests. And the reason
that sounds cool.
The reason we like those is because you can really kind of craft it and customize it, right? So if you want to go mountain biking, we can arrange that. If you want to, do some of the more active adventure type activities, mountain biking, just hiking and trekking, even, golfing and things like that. Whereas if you're on the bigger ships, tend to have their tours are included, and I'm not going to knock them, but being able to, customize it requires a little bit of a smaller platform. And so that's what we do. They don't necessarily get off the boat away from port, but you're in much smaller ports. And you can customize the experience to a far greater degree than you can when you have 70, 80, 200 guests. And so when you have a small group or even a charter, you can really kind of customize the experience to what people want to do. And our clients tend to want to get out there and be active.
Right, because if you've got 200 people, if you want to do mountain biking, you got to have that planned. Like when you build the ship, you got to have, okay, this is our mountain biking operator, and on every Tuesday and Friday, we're going to stop and we're going to put 50 people on bicycles and they're going to go bike riding.
Or even riding right along the river with the boat. Right. That's something that you can do on a barge, right? On a barge cruise is you can get off, ride along the towpath, meet them at the next stop. You're sitting there sipping your glass of wine because you've probably gone faster than the barge itself. And so you're waiting for them sipping your wine as the boat comes and meets you.
You've got like the bicycles right on the barge, so they can just
they can do that. So you can just hop off and ride right alongside of the towpath, which is a great way to see things and kind of experience the local culture.
Okay, you just totally changed my mind with being able to get on the bike and go ahead a little bit and have a little bit of independence, if you want to call it that, or just that ability to get a little closer to people as opposed to sitting on a boat waving at them as you go by.
Well, I think that's symbolic of kind of how we try to do it all over the world. Is give somebody something a little bit different, unique access.
So we discussed quite a bit about the Arctic, and I don't know if that's because I made a face, but I'm curious, is there a particular area or particular thing that's happening right now that you're super excited about personally? Either just because you love going there or because you're just super excited to share it with your clients. What are you excited about?
Yeah, like I said, the Arctic is really hot right now. It was this summer. It's going to be next summer. Another thing, that's really kind of at the forefront, and this is also tends to center around the poles, but is Northern Lights, right? The auroral cycle is at its peak. It's an 11-year peak. We've seen them here in North America, right?
Yeah.
And so that's getting people excited about it. But there's some very specific kind of Northern Lights and aurora itineraries, mostly in the Arctic, but there are even some Southern Lights in Antarctica. So very specific departures, and again, a small ship can kind of navigate the weather and increase your likelihood of seeing Northern Lights. And so that's a hot topic right now. Again, it was this summer. These trips are actually operating like right now in the Arctic. There's still availability in September and October, but next summer is also kind of the peak of this auroral cycle. So that's something that's really hot, kind of an interesting trend that we're seeing right now. Like I said, the Mediterranean, there's a lot of unique new opportunities there, kind of in the shoulder seasons that we're really excited about. The polar regions, Antarctica is again, it was focused on the peninsula for a long time, and there's really some new itineraries that are going farther afield. Again, these are for the ice files, right? The people that really want to get out there and spend 20, 30 days going to the Ross Sea or going to the Weddell Sea, or these places that are really kind of off the beaten path, even for Antarctica. And then
I just learned a new word: ice files.
I made that up.
Okay, interesting.
But they're out there. They are.
Yeah. That's pretty cool.
And then there's a really the last trend that we're excited about is there's this new kind of level of luxury that really has never been accessible before, right? A lot of times, for a lot of my career, you kind of had to sacrifice comfort for expedition, right? A lot of these original boats were maybe converted research boats or converted fishing boats, or that sort of thing. So they were a little bit rough around the edges. But in the last 5 years or so, this next generation of small ships and yachts is being deployed that really embrace the activity and embrace the expedition element of it, but with a level of luxury that's never really been presented before. So, Galapagos Islands, Indonesia, the poles, of course, and Mediterranean, just really have for those luxury travelers who feel like I want to do this, but I don't want to sacrifice. There's definitely an option for those people right now, and that's pretty exciting too, because I think that's maybe keeping some folks on the sidelines, maybe from jumping ship again. And there really is some beautiful technologically advanced vessels that are being launched that we're super excited about.
I was going to ask you what somebody that normally does kind of the traditional larger cruises and maybe has done a few of them, and they've got their pattern for they start planning out 6 months ahead or whatever. I have no idea. I was going to say, what would you suggest to them? Then I realized, well, they're probably not listening to this conversation at this point. But if they are, what should just people in general know about you? They've never taken an expedition cruise. How are there 2 or 3 you better plan far ahead, or just tips or advice that you would give to somebody that's kind of rolling around their head? They think they heard something that you said and thought, you know what, that's interesting, as far as lead time or anything else you think they should know to get them going.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, these are small boats, and they do book pretty far in advance. So if you want your best selection of itinerary, kind of timing and cabin and ship, book in advance. 6 to 9, even 12 months in advance is best. The other thing I said it earlier, that there's a lot of information out there, and there's a lot of misinformation, out there. And so, if you've never done this style of travel before and you're looking to get into it, talk to an expert. We are here to help. We are not here to sell you on something. We are here to learn about your interests and help determine if this is the right style of travel for you. And if it is, what is the right, product to get on? How active do you want to be? How luxurious do you want to be? What's the benefit of going early versus late season? So, talk to somebody, ask them a few leading questions and see, have you been on this trip? Have you been on this boat? Talk to an expert, get a trusted opinion, which we strive to be, to help guide you. It can be overwhelming to try to select, an Arctic Svalbard cruise on your own, amongst all the options that are out there. And they are all a little bit different.
Right.
And so just talk to somebody who knows what they're doing, and, it's going to go a long ways into making sure you have a successful adventure.
Not everybody is as social and outgoing and comfortable having a conversation as you and I are. And I know there's a whole subset of the population that's like, I don't really want to talk to anybody. I've got access to the internet. I've got Google. I don't really need to talk to anybody. They book, rooms on Airbnb. They use booking.com to book their hotels. They use Kayak to book their flights, whatever. And I never need to talk to a person. So I'm just kind of devil's advocate, or giving you an opportunity to hear how you'd respond. Geez, Todd, I just go on your website. You've got all the good cruises. You've got a great reputation. Your reviews are great, which means, therefore, anything I see on your website's probably great. And then I can just pick out whatever Arctic cruise I see, and now I can go search for that and book directly with the company on their website, whatever. I don't actually need to talk to anybody. And you guys have already vetted it, whatever. So what's your response? Why should they not do that?
Yeah. Good question. I mean, and we do. We email with folks quite a bit, or text message, or what have you. But I just feel like, a 5-minute conversation can alleviate, hours and hours of texting.
You know what? I gotta stop you right here, because remember when you were going through some of your trips and you saw the look on my face and you stopped and you went, Jason, I sense you have a question about that. Wouldn't that be powerful? If I was a client thinking about going on a trip and I'm doing a video call with you and you're discussing the options and you see my lip curl or whatever, and you've got an opportunity, because I wouldn't have stopped you. Honestly, if you hadn't think I would just, okay, keep going. But I think it's powerful when you can get that a little bit in voice as well on a phone call. So I think that face-to-face is great, at least a telephone call. So anybody listening to this, anyway, go ahead. Please continue.
Well, yeah. I mean, where I was going with that is, like I said, a 5-minute phone call can save a lot of time. But if you're not that person, we email with folks a lot. That's a big part of it. You can do a click and book, which is fine too. But I'll tell you a little story from again my experience as a guide. So I worked on a boat in Alaska that only had bunk beds on the ship. Okay. And so we had a sales staff who was paid on commission, and they
only had one product.
They did not always reveal to the buyer that there was only bunk beds. Right. So here I am greeting somebody. They're excited about their Alaska cruise. They're coming on board. Let me show you your cabin. I show them their cabin. They're like, we're on our honeymoon. Are you kidding me? There's only bunk beds here. And so, like I said, sometimes, booking direct seems like the best way to go. But, again, somebody who works with all of the products across the board can offer maybe a little more honest, unbiased opinions to compare between the options that are out there, right? If you contact somebody directly, they're going to tell you about their product. They might not tell you about their competitor, who for you might be a little bit of a better fit. So you don't necessarily, have to call, but I think there's a lot of benefit in booking, with somebody who represents a wide variety of products. It's advantageous. And I often say, my staff knows these products better than the booking agents who work for the companies who are operating them, because we're in the field a lot. We're comparing the boats, we're comparing the products, and we see the whole picture. So like I said, you don't necessarily need to call, but if you have any question or any uncertainty at all, send that email, give us a text, and we'll help clarify for you, and we'll dazzle you, with our knowledge and gain your trust, so that hopefully, you book with us. Also, when you're booking direct, you're generally calling call center. And so, or emailing a call center. So whoever's working at that moment is who's answering your question. You don't have a personal relationship with, a particular person. And so our staff, and I always felt like this was really important in the industry, and we're structured this way on purpose, is the same person who helps you decide and takes your deposit and makes the booking is the same person who helps you prepare, and is also the same person who's going to call you after the trip is over. So there's
ask for a review.
There's the accountability there, right? They're not going to put you on something that's the wrong fit. Whereas if you're calling a call center, or you don't have that personal touch, you may not have that accountability down the line.
A person may not even be there when you actually go on the trip, especially if you're doing 9-12 months in advance. Call centers don't necessarily have a reputation.
We're striving for long-term relationships with our clients. Yeah.
Very cool. I thought you'd probably would describe it along those lines, and you did much better than I could have done. So I think that's a good thing. I also saw on your website, and I think it's worth mentioning, is you guys have partnerships, relationships. We talked about your relationships with your vendors. So when someone books one of the trips through you, it's, do you want to discuss how we don't need to go into great detail, but I kind of get the impression it's not like it's super more expensive or anything like that for somebody to book a cruise through you as if they booked it directly.
No, absolutely no. It's never more expensive, and oftentimes it's less expensive. Our volume is able to get deals and discounts, but you get all of this. You get all of this service. You get this expertise, knowledge. You get this personalized relationship. You get this comparison between all of the companies. You get this preparation. You get all this really at no additional cost. It's an added benefit with booking through AdventureSmith. Yeah, you'd never pay more. We work on a commissions with our partners, so you never pay more, and you often do pay less. And all of these benefits are essentially free on top of it. And we work hard to gain your trust and have a long-term relationship with our clients. And we're happy to provide referrals. I think it shows.
That's cool. And I think a lot of people just may not get that. Things have just changed enough in the last 20, 30 years. They just might not get, I can, work with someone on your team, Todd, and they can set it all up for me. I'm not paying anything more. And I've got somebody, is your staff all in Tahoe, or are you doing the remote thing with some of them, or just, I don't know what, it's not doesn't matter.
Yeah, no, we do. We have an office in North Lake Tahoe and Truckee, and most of our staff is here. During the pandemic, some people did have to leave, and because of modern technology, we're able to keep those folks on. But we're not, a remote-based company. We do have an office here, and I really believe that that's an important part of our process as well. We are here sharing ideas. Hey, I just got this question from a client. I'm going to share it with all of you. In the office. There's some intellectual information that passes through here every day that wouldn't happen if we were all working remote. So we do have a handful of remote employees, and we're happy that we're able to keep them on. But we're also very pleased that the bulk of our staff is local, and we're kind of one big family here in North Lake Tahoe, living the lifestyle and living the dream, and taking these trips all over the world.
That's very cool. That's a great place. Anything else that we need to, I don't know if you were able to share everything you wanted to share. Should we come back another day? I think we've covered it
pretty well, Jason. Yeah, you got good questions. I appreciate the opportunity.
Yeah. Well, it was a lot of fun having you on. I learned quite a bit about, you said ice files. So I got to remember that one. I'm sure that's going to come up in the social lexicon here soon. I'm sure people will be texting that, and anyway. Todd, thank you so much for taking time out of your day to share it with us. And I look forward to collaborating with you on some more projects in the future. Thanks, Todd.
Jason, thanks for the opportunity. It's wonderful talking to you today.
I trust you enjoyed listening to the conversation as much as I enjoyed recording it. If you're enjoying the Big World Made Small podcast, please take a moment to tell the algorithm by subscribing and posting a review so that others can benefit as well. I also invite you to take a quick trip over to bigworldmadesmall.com and join our private adventure travel community to receive new episode notifications, special access to our guest experts, and perhaps even some exclusive partner offers that we haven't discussed on the podcast. I'll publish another episode soon. Until then, keep exploring. It's the best way to make a big world feel just a bit smaller.